Hello, and welcome to this portion of our presentation. My name is Gary Groom. I'm one of the fiscal staff with DD Council, and today I'm going to cover some of the financial management requirements associated with your grant award. Before jumping into specifics, I do want to note there are several resources available that can help with questions you may have during your grant. One of the primary sources of information is a publication known as the Uniform Administrative Requirements, Cost Principles, and Audit Requirements for HHS Awards, or what is more commonly referred to as the Uniform Guidance. You can see on the slide it is also referred to as 45 CFR Part 75. This is the version of the Uniform Guidance adopted by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, which is where council funding originates. This will be your most complete resource to finding the answers to your questions, as it covers the whole life cycle of a grant award from beginning to end. You can find it on the internet at the website on the slide, or by simply entering the title into any internet search engine. It also might be a good idea to keep handy a copy of Council's Grantee guidelines. Certain terms and conditions of your grant award, as well as some of the more relevant topics from the Uniform Guidance, have been addressed in the document. A copy of the Grantee guidelines is included with your award notification materials on DD Suite. And of course, staff is always more than willing to provide assistance. Now let's jump into some of the requirements of your grant award. It is important to remember that all grant records must be retained for a period of not less than 6 years from the date of submission of the final expense report, or until any pending issues related to the records of an audit or review have been resolved, whichever is later. The retention requirement extends to all source documents. This includes accounting transaction registers, general ledgers, subsidiary ledgers, personnel and payroll records, canceled checks, and any other grant-related documents and records. Records of different fiscal periods should be separately identified and maintained so that information may be easily located. When records are stored off-site, a written index of their location should be on hand, and ready access to the records should be assured. As a part of your grant agreement, Council must be provided access to all grant-related records. Additionally, grantees are expected to meet the standards and requirements for financial management systems set forth in the Uniform Guidance. These standards are intended to ensure that federal funds are handled in a manner that includes adequate internal controls and cash management consistent with federal requirements. Grantees must use financial management systems that enable them to do all of the following: provide accurate, current, and complete financial information about federal awards. Maintain records that adequately identify the sources of funds for federally assisted activities and the purposes for which the award was used, including authorizations, obligations, expenditures, and any program income. Council does not require the physical segregation of grant funds. However, the accounting systems of grantees must ensure that funds are not commingled and can be accounted for separately. Accounting records must be supported by source documentation, such as invoices, receipts and canceled checks, paid bills, payrolls, and time and attendance records. Credit card statements are not sufficient as source documentation. Financial systems must provide for effective control over and accountability for all cash, real and personal property, and other assets under the award, and ensure that they are used only for authorized purposes. Determine the allowability of costs in accordance with the applicable federal cost principles, program regulations, and other requirements cited in the Notice of Grant Award. And lastly, financial systems must minimize the time elapsing between any advance payment under this grant award and the disbursement of funds for grant costs. As mentioned previously, the cost principles can best be described as the tools to help determine whether a particular cost can be charged to your grant award. To determine if a cost is allowable, the following 4 questions should be asked. Is the cost necessary and reasonable? Is it required for project performance? And is the cost no greater than what someone would normally pay for the same good or service? Is the cost allocable? Does the good or service being purchased advance the work of the grant? Is the cost consistent? Will this cost be handled in the same manner as similar costs within the organization? And does the cost conform? Will the purchase follow the rules and regulations for this federal award? A yes to each of these questions should provide a high level of assurance that a particular cost is allowable. It is important to note that there are specific requirements regarding the documentation of allowable personnel costs. Compensation costs for personnel are allowable to the extent they are reasonable, conform to the established policy of the organization, consistently applied regardless of the source of funds, reflect no more than the time actually devoted to the project, and are adequately documented. Documentation for compensation costs must meet the minimum standards as described in the uniform guidance. These records must be supported by a system of internal control, which provides reasonable assurance that the charges are accurate, allowable, and properly allocated. Be incorporated into the official records of the organization. Reasonably reflect the total activity for which the employee is compensated by the organization. Encompass both federally assisted and all other activities compensated by the organization. Comply with the established accounting practices and policies of the organization. Support the distribution of the employee's compensation among specific activities or cost objectives. Additionally, charges for compensation costs of non-exempt employees must also be supported by records indicating the total number of hours worked each day. And the compensation of employees used in meeting match requirements must be supported in the same manner as compensation claimed for reimbursement from the grant award. And finally, a brief discussion about audits. An audit is a systematic review to determine whether internal accounting and other control systems provide reasonable assurance of the following: that financial operations are properly conducted, that financial reports are timely, fair, and accurate, that the entity has complied with applicable laws, regulations, and terms and conditions of the grant award, that resources are managed and used economically and efficiently, and that the desired results and objectives are being achieved effectively. Grantees are subject to the audit requirements specified in the uniform guidance. In general, regulations require grantees that spend $750,000 or more in federal awards within the grantee's fiscal year to have a single or program-specific audit conducted annually. The audit must meet the standards specified in generally accepted government auditing standards, and one copy of the audit report should be submitted to council. If necessary, council will issue a management decision regarding any audit findings related to council-funded awards within 6 months of receiving the audit report. Now, grantees that spend less than $750,000 in federal funds during the grantee's fiscal year are exempt from federal audit requirements for that year, but records must be available for review or audit by appropriate officials. And that concludes this portion of the presentation. Thank you very much for spending some time with me covering these topics today. For guidance on requesting grant funds and submitting budget revisions, please refer to the Requesting Funds segment of our presentation.